Before we get into the rest of today's video, I just want to say thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service with over 3,000 documentaries for you to watch. A lot of those are true crime documentaries. In addition to true crime, subscribers can also enjoy other feature genres such as history, nature, space, and much more. Magellan TV can be watched anytime, anywhere on your television, laptop, or mobile device. One of the documentaries I really enjoyed recently was The Price of Honor. It's an incredible documentary that provides an in-depth look at the lives of Amina and Sarah Saeed. They were two teenage sisters from Lewisville, Texas, whose lives were taken by their own father, Yasser Saeed. The documentary includes interviews with family and friends where they give information that has never been shared elsewhere. To watch The Price of Honor or many other excellent documentaries on Magellan TV, click the first link you see in the description and get a 1-month free trial. That's a whole month you get for free, so go ahead and click on the link to help support the channel and to watch some excellent documentaries. On October 26, 1991, the body of a young woman was found in a heavily wooded area in Barnegat, New Jersey. An autopsy uncovered that she suffered multiple stab wounds and that she had been the victim of an assault. The woman was quickly identified as 30-year-old Deborah Ann Bloomquist. Deborah had been living in a motel in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and was last seen at a tavern in Asbury Park on October 24, 1991. She has no ties to the Barnegat area. Deborah had grown up in Burlington County and was estranged from her family. She had been living in motels in Monmouth for about 2 years. Biological evidence was collected from Deborah's body and preserved. During that time, the technology did not exist to submit evidence for DNA testing. Unfortunately, no leads were established and the case went cold. It would remain that way for some time. The biological evidence collected back in 1991 led to the development of a male DNA profile. Then, in January of 2022, the case was presented to the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General Cold Case Task Force, and the investigation was reopened. With today's modern technology, detectives were able to identify the DNA collected from the crime scene in 1991 as belonging to John Pelletier, concluding that he was responsible for taking Deborah's life. Pelletier frustratingly passed away in Linton, North Dakota in 2015. He grew up in Barnegat, New Jersey and lived there until 2005. Court records show that Pelletier was charged by the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office in 1999 with theft by deception, making a false statement to obtain a credit card. He pled guilty and was placed on probation. Prosecutor Bradley Billheimer said, "After more than 3 decades, this hideous crime has, at long last, been solved. Though Pelletier never faced justice for his actions in this life, we nevertheless hope this conclusive determination brings some level of peace and closure to the family of Debbie Ann Bloomquist. I'd like to thank the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General and the New Jersey State Police for the creation of the Cold Case Task Force. The resources made available through the collaborative investigative process the Cold Case Task Force provides allowed us to finally solve this heinous crime. Barnegat County Township Chief of Police Keith Germain and Barnegat Township Detective William Hetrick deserve a lot of credit for never giving up on this case. I am grateful for their efforts," Billheimer stated. On December 16, 1988, a woman's body was found on the side of Interstate 59 near Rising Fawn in Dade County, Georgia. An autopsy revealed that she had been assaulted and strangled. It was determined that her life was taken a few months before she was found. Her body was severely decomposed and could not be identified. Since investigators did not know her name, she was called Rising Fawn Jane Doe. A facial reconstruction was made to show what she might have looked like. It showed a white female with brownish to red hair and crooked teeth. It was believed she was in her late teens. She was wearing an extra-large navy blue thermal knit long-sleeve pullover shirt, navy blue bra, Calvin Klein brand blue jeans, black lace-up ankle-high shoes size 9, yellow gold chain, and a white gold pinky ring with a heart on the top. At the crime scene, investigators found and collected male DNA. Samuel Little soon became a suspect as he committed a similar crime in Dade County, Georgia, but his DNA was not a match and he was ruled out. Larry Dwayne Hall was also named a suspect in the case. He is speculated to be responsible for the disappearances of up to 45 women during the 1980s and 1990s. Many of his speculated victims were young women that were mutilated and found near Civil War memorials. He is currently incarcerated in a North Carolina federal prison. Hall was never formally charged in the Rising Fawn Jane Doe case. Recently, Othram Inc. partnered with Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the FBI to help identify the victim. They did just that in March of 2022. Using the help of genetic genealogy, they identified Rising Fawn Jane Doe to be Stacey Lyn Chahorski. Stacey was 19 years old when her life was taken. She was officially reported missing in January of 1989, 4 months after she was last contacted. Stacey had informed her mother, via telephone, that she was planning to hitch rides from her current location in North Carolina to her home state of Michigan, to the cities of Flint and Muskegon. In September of 2022, the same technology was used to identify the man responsible for taking her life as Henry Frederick Wise. He was 34 years old when the crime took place and had a criminal history in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina that predated mandatory DNA testing for felony crimes, which is why he was not identified earlier. When he was 44 years old, he burned to death in South Carolina when he was in a car accident. Good preparation for an eternity in hell. Wise was a stunt car driver, but he also worked as a truck driver for the Western Carolina Trucking Company. He routinely took a route through Chattanooga, Birmingham, and Nashville. This was a direct route to where Stacey was found. Mary Beth Smith, Stacey Chahorski's mother, expressed gratitude to the FBI, GBI Special Agent Adam Jones for his relentless pursuit of the case, and GBI forensic artist Marla Lawson for her work on the composite drawing and clay rendering. She also thanked Dade County Sheriff Ray Cross, all the people in Dade County who took care of Stacey as she was brought home to Norton Shores, Michigan, and the Norton Shores Police Department for never giving up on finding her. On Saturday, October 23, 1971, at approximately 10:40 p.m., Montgomery County police officers were called to the Manor Country Club in the 14,900 block of Carrollton Road in Rockville, Maryland, after witnesses reported a man lying face down in the southeast parking lot. Officers arrived at the scene and located James Tappen Hall, suffering from a gunshot wound. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he succumbed to his injuries 3 days later. James was the Montgomery County Special Deputy Sheriff Captain. Investigators believe that James interrupted a residential burglary in progress. In 1973, a local criminal by the name of Larry David Beckard was interviewed by investigators, but had not been labeled as a suspect. With no suspects and no leads, James's case grew cold. Investigators revisited the case in 2021 on the 50th anniversary of the crime. Detective Kay Leggett and Corporal L. Killen combed through the case files, recordings, and interviewed witnesses. Through their investigation, they narrowed in on one person, Larry David Becker. Detectives determined that around 1975, Becker began using the last name Smith and had been living in Little Falls, New York for over 45 years. Detective Leggett and Corporal Killen interviewed Smith in New York on September 1, 2022. During the interview, Smith admitted to shooting James Tappen Hall. He was then promptly arrested. He is 71 years old now and was 20 when he committed the crime. Investigators do not know why Smith decided to confess now, since he denied involvement when questioned back in 1973. He is currently waiting to be taken to Maryland to face the charges against him. The department said the investigation is ongoing, and detectives ask anyone with information regarding Smith's involvement to call the Major Crimes Division at this number. Investigators say on the day of the shooting, James was off duty and was working as a private security guard at Manor Country Club. Smith was in the middle of stealing things from a house and taking them to his getaway car when James spotted him. Smith then shot James one time in the head and drove away from the scene. Smith now claims that it was an accident. Montgomery County Police said this was the oldest cold case they had ever solved. 19-year-old Brittany McGlone lived in East Texas in 2007. She was working 2 jobs to save money for college. Brittany planned to attend Baylor University and study nursing. One of her jobs was working at the Lowe's Distribution Center in Mount Vernon. On the morning of May 4, 2007, she finished her overnight shift and drove to her boyfriend's house in Winsboro, Texas to sleep. Her boyfriend, Jeff Stogner, and his family, who also lived there, was not home at the time because they gave someone a ride to the airport. Brittany's mother called her a few times that day, but no response. She then called Jeff Stogner. Jeff told her that he was just arriving back home and that Brittany's car was in the driveway. They hung up. Jeff went into the house, found Brittany's body on his bed, and called 911. She had been assaulted and beaten with an unknown object. An autopsy ruled that the cause was massive head trauma. Many people were questioned by detectives, including Jeff and his family, but no suspects have been publicly named. Brittany's sister Hope had a lot to say about Brittany's character. No matter what kind of day she was having, Brittany could always find the silver lining. Her bright smile, goofy sense of humor, and positive outlook on life would spread to the ones she was with, making it impossible for anyone to have a bad day. She didn't deserve this, Hope said. She was this innocent, pure person who never did anything wrong, never got into trouble. She always saw the good in people and just loved life. Why would someone do this to her? Hope has publicly said that her family have their theories about who took Brittany's life, but remain open to any and all possibilities. Among the possibilities is a man known by Jeff Stogner's family, who was questioned early in the investigation. The man has a lengthy criminal record with prior charges for burglary, assault, and assault with a weapon. In 2021, Wood County Sheriff Kelly Cole said there is plenty of evidence, like bloodstains and DNA, from the scene that they plan to retest now that DNA technology is more advanced. On September 1st, 2022, the Wood County, Texas Sheriff's Office posted an update on Facebook about Brittany's case, stating that on August 31st, an arrest warrant had been obtained by Wood County Sheriff's Office that resulted in Captain Mike Chilson and Ranger John Vance traveling to the Dallas-Fort Worth area where Chad Earl Carr was arrested. Chad Carr is the man Brittany's family had their suspicions about. Carr is currently in the Wood County Jail with his bond set at $1 million. Brittany's family posted on their Facebook page, "Never did I think this day would come, 15 years later, and it has." The post also thanked Sheriff Cole. However, they added, "This is just the beginning." Lynette Joy Sims was born in New South Wales, Australia in 1948. In 1965, she met Chris Dawson at a high school function. The pair got married in 1970 at St. Jude's Church, Randwick, in Sydney, and later had 2 children. Chris and his twin brother Paul played professional rugby league football for the next few years. After ending their rugby careers, the Dawson brothers found employment as physical education teachers. Chris worked at Cromer High School near Sydney. Both Chris and Paul are alleged to have regularly engaged in illicit behavior with female students at their respective schools. In 1981, Chris groomed and slept with a student named Joanne Curtis. Joanne temporarily moved into the Dawson family residence in Bayview in 1982. Chris told Lynette about Joanne's problems at her home with her family as a reason as to why she had to stay at their house. Chris was 32 years old then, and Joanne was 16. Lynette was phoned by her mom on January 8, 1982. This was the last time they would communicate with each other. She planned to meet her mother and family at the Northbridge Baths the following day, but never arrived. Chris didn't report his wife missing until February 18, 1982, 6 weeks after she had vanished. Joanne then permanently moved in with Chris. When questioned by investigators, Chris said that Lynette left after marital problems caused over her spending. Later, Chris suggested that she had joined a religious organization. In 1983, he finalized divorce proceedings against Lynette and married Joanne Curtis the following year. Some investigators believe that Chris took Lynette's life, but that was hard to prove without a body. The first inquest held in February of 2001, the deputy state coroner, Jan Stevenson, determined that Lynette is not alive anymore and that the person responsible was someone she knew. A second inquest held in February 2003 by State Coroner Karl Milanovanovich recommended that Chris be charged with ending Lynette's life. The New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery, refused to prosecute Chris Dawson, citing the lack of evidence. In April of 2018, following extensive investigations, New South Wales Police requested the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to review its brief of evidence. Then, in December 2018, Chris Dawson was arrested in Queensland, Australia, in connection to Lynette's case. Dawson still claimed he was innocent and delayed the trial several times because, according to him, there was a risk that members of the jury could have prejudged his guilt due to widespread publicity about the case. In May of 2022, Justice Robert Beach Jones granted Dawson's application for a judge-alone trial after he argued the extensive pretrial publicity meant a jury was unsuitable in his case. The trial began on May 9th. The prosecution claimed that Dawson took Lynette's life because of his desire for an unfettered relationship with Joanne Curtis. The defense acknowledged that Dawson may have failed his wife, but that she had left and abandoned the family of her own accord, and suggested she may have created a new life. The defense relied on a number of witnesses who claimed to have seen Lynette since her disappearance. On August 30th, 2022, Justice Harrison found 74-year-old Chris Dawson guilty, and he delivered his reasons as well. He found Dawson had lied on a number of occasions, including about his relationship with Joanne, about his desire to resume a relationship with his wife, and about receiving phone calls from Lynette after she disappeared. Justice Harris rejected the alleged sightings of Lynette as wholly unreliable and found there was a most compelling body of evidence to reject the hypothesis that Lynette Dawson abandoned her family. He was satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Lynette Dawson is not alive anymore, as a result of a conscious and voluntary act by Chris Dawson. A woman's body was found on May 4, 2006, near a truck stop in Mount Airy, Maryland. She was quickly identified as 24-year-old Dusty Shuck. Dusty was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. She had a 4-year-old son at the time. Officials say that she had been beaten and stabbed numerous times. The person who took her life left behind his DNA. Recently, investigators partnered with a California-based forensic genetic genealogy company called Identifiers to use that DNA collected back in 2006 to identify the culprit. In August of 2022, he was identified as Gary Dean Artman. If this asshole's name or face rings a bell, it's because I talked about him in a recent video, since he's responsible for taking the life of Sharon Hammock as well. He was arrested in Mississippi on August 16, 2022. Artman is a truck driver who currently lives in Florida. Dusty's mother Lori said that she is relieved that someone has been arrested, especially after nearly 2 decades. He's off the streets and he can't hurt anybody else. It doesn't bring back Dusty, but giving her justice, that's all this family needs. The mother has a message for people whose cases are unsolved. I'd say don't give up hope. Pray every day for justice. Whether it's spiritual or physical, it will happen. Dusty's son is now 20 years old with a child of his own. She would have been a grandmother. 19-year-old Nancy Elaine Anderson lived in Michigan in 1971. She had just recently graduated from high school. Nancy was one of 10 children. In the fall of 1971, Nancy moved to Waikiki in Honolulu County, Hawaii. She landed a job at a local McDonald's and found an apartment where she lived with roommate Jody Spooner. In the late afternoon hours of January 7, 1972, Jody Spooner called 911 to report that she found Nancy's lifeless body in her bathroom. At first, Jody believed her roommate took her own life, but investigators discovered that Nancy had been fatally stabbed by someone else. The autopsy would later reveal that Nancy had been stabbed 63 times. Investigators found blood at the crime scene on 2 towels that belonged to a man. They theorized that the culprit accidentally cut himself during the attack. Jody Spooner helped police create a timeline of events leading up to the crime. Jody told them about 2 cutlery salesmen who was in their apartment around 1:30 to 1:45 p.m. Jody says that after they left, she went to take a nap in her room. She awoke at 5:15 p.m., hearing water running in Nancy's bathroom. When she went to take a look, she discovered Nancy's body and called the police. The first units responded at 5:29 p.m. Police interviewed the 2 door-to-door salesmen, but found that they were not viable suspects. After they left, Nancy went to a nearby Bank of Hawaii to open an account. The teller at the bank estimated that Nancy was at the bank somewhere between 2:15 and 3 p.m. Based on the time it would take for Nancy to walk home from the bank, the police estimated her life was taken somewhere between 3:10 p.m. and 5:15 p.m. The salesman's fingerprints did not match any at the crime scene, and they both passed polygraph tests. They were subsequently ruled out as suspects. Jody Spooner described Nancy as too friendly with strangers, and a person who would talk to anyone on the street without regard for her personal safety. Jody's boyfriend, Kim Weaver, said that Nancy associated with men he only knew by nickname: Reno, Nevada, Cowboy, Frenchman, and the Dude from Detroit. The man known as Reno, Nevada was identified as William Manor. William said he dated Nancy, but he hadn't been to her apartment. He said he met Nancy and made plans with her through apparently frequent yet chance meetings at the beach. William also claimed to have seen Nancy hanging out with other men, but he did not know any of their names. Manor described Nancy as a very nice girl with a great personality, but felt she could have been a little less friendly with strangers. A friend of Jody Spooner told the police that Nancy would bring home weird-looking guys and dated several different men. Interviews, lie detector tests, and even DNA tests over the decades involving many of Nancy's friends, co-workers, associates, and roommate in Hawaii turned up little of value. More specifically, those efforts failed to yield a viable suspect. In 2018, investigators started working with Parabon Nanolabs to help solve the case by identifying the perpetrator. Parabon was able to create this image of the suspect using his DNA that was found on the towels inside of Nancy's apartment back in 1972. Then, more recently, the unknown man's DNA was submitted into public DNA databases. Using genetic genealogy, it led investigators to 77-year-old Tudor Chirilla Jr. He was taken into custody at his home in Reno, Nevada on September 13, 2022. Chirilla tried to take his own life after he was arrested, but failed. Investigators discovered that he was a graduate assistant at the University of Hawaii in 1971. After leaving Hawaii, Chirilla reportedly went to law school, graduated, and worked as a deputy attorney general in Nevada. He was then a longtime attorney in Reno, Carson City, and the Lake Tahoe area. He eventually ran for election to the Nevada Supreme Court in 1994. Chirilla lost that election. Nancy's brother, Jack Anderson, had this to say following the arrest: "She was an integral part of our family, and when her life was taken, it just left a hole in our hearts and in our family." Chirilla is currently in custody in Reno, and he has not yet entered a plea. 11-year-old Lora Ann Huizar lived in Fort Pierce, Florida in 1983. On the evening of Saturday, November 5th, she spent the night at her friend's house. The following day, she decided to walk home. She stopped at a gas station along the way and seemingly vanished into thin air after exiting the building. Lora Ann's father reported her missing when she did not return home as planned. However, at the time, authorities did not take the reports of missing adolescents seriously until they had been missing for a longer period of time. 3 days later, authorities with the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office received reports that a body of a young girl was found in a drainage ditch, which was an estimated 600 yards from the gas station where Lora Ann was last seen. St. Lucie County Deputy James Howard Harrison was the first law enforcement officer to arrive on the scene. It was later learned that he was also the last person to have seen Lora Ann alive. On the day she vanished, Deputy Harrison reported seeing a young girl walking in the area where she was last seen. Harrison noted in his report that the girl was walking away from the gas station and appeared to be carrying a bundle of clothing. Chief Deputy Brian Hester questioned why Harrison did not offer the girl a ride. Harrison simply said she seemed to be a runaway. When Harrison arrived at the crime scene, he asked the witnesses who found the body to leave the area. Several other deputies arrived approximately 20 minutes later. In addition to identifying the body as Lora Ann, authorities confirmed that she had been assaulted. The autopsy revealed that she had been asphyxiated. Although detectives collected evidence from Lora Ann's body, DNA testing was not yet available, and there were few leads in the heinous crime. In 2020, investigators decided to take another look at the case. This time, with more advanced DNA technology, they were able to identify the man responsible. In March of 2022, it was confirmed that Deputy James Howard Harrison took the life of Lora Ann Huizar. His DNA matched the DNA found inside her body. St. Lucie County Sheriff's Detective Paul Taylor said he began working the case in 2020. As he began his investigation, Harrison was not even a name on his radar. However, as he dug deeper into the evidence, he realized Harrison had a troubled past and a disturbing reputation for targeting young girls. In addition to working for the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, Harrison was a preacher at Fort Pierce's Bethel Baptist Church. Approximately 5 months after Lora Ann's life was taken, Harrison was accused of abuse by members of the church. Harrison realized that the accusations could cost him his job at the sheriff's office. In an effort to spare his job, he went directly to the home of the chief deputy to explain the situation. Although he brought his wife along and denied the allegations, the chief told Harrison to leave and immediately contacted Sheriff Lanny Norville about the accusations and told him he wanted Harrison to be dismissed. The current St. Lucie sheriff, Ken J. Mascara, said he remembers working with Harrison back in the 1980s. At that time, he expressed concerns about Harrison's interactions with younger girls. Unfortunately, Ken J. Mascara's complaints were essentially ignored. Mascara said his superiors believed James Howard Harrison simply enjoyed mentoring children and teenagers in his capacity as a preacher, and extended that to the girls he met through his work with the sheriff's office. Detective Paul Taylor said he is concerned that former Deputy Harris used his position as a preacher and a sheriff to take advantage of children and teens throughout the area. However, no other victims have come forward. It is unclear how Harrison continued working in law enforcement after he was accused of inappropriate behavior with minors. However, Taylor said hiring decisions were largely based on resumes alone, and background checks were rare at the time. According to his obituary, James Howard Harrison passed away on June 2, 2008, at the age of 73. The obituary states he worked in law enforcement for 25 years and was a member of the Oakview Baptist Church at the time of his passing. Harrison was preceded by his wife, Elizabeth. He was survived by one son, one daughter, and 3 grandchildren. Detective Paul Taylor said he was happy to have finally solved the 39-year-old crime. However, the conclusion he reached was both good and bad. In the media release, he said, "The day I solved this case was both the worst and best day of my 30-year career in law enforcement. Nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop, and it felt bittersweet to finally provide the victim's family with some long-awaited answers." Although both of Lora Ann's parents are not alive anymore, her brother Joe and sister Michelle said they are both thankful to have some closure. Yonkers Police Department officers on September 4, 2012, at approximately 5:35 p.m. responded to a 911 call about a suspicious package being found in the woods. Upon arriving at the scene, first responders found a decomposing human body that was wrapped in a large black garbage bag. Detectives with the department's Major Case Squad and Crime Scene Unit took over the investigation and were able to identify the victim as 26-year-old Bronx resident Pamela Graddick. Investigations determined that Pamela had been shot twice in the head at a location outside of Yonkers and dumped in the woods in an attempt to conceal the crime. Police identified Wanda Vigil as a person of interest early on. She was the girlfriend of Pamela and they lived in the same apartment. They were unable to explain how the petite woman could have moved the larger Pamela's body to a secluded area in the woods. Following a 2-year investigation, authorities were unable to come up with enough evidence to charge anyone, and the case was transferred to the Yonkers Police Department Cold Case Unit. In January of 2022, investigators conducted an interview with 41-year-old Wanda Vigil. During the interview, Vigil confessed. She said that she shot Pamela inside the Bronx apartment they shared due to ongoing domestic issues between them. She said that she got the weapon from John Torres. Torres again helped her move the body from her apartment to the woods. In March of 2022, both Wanda Vigil and John Torres were taken into custody. Torres was charged with second-degree criminal facilitation, first-degree prosecution hindering, and tampering with physical evidence, all of which are felonies. City of Yonkers Police Commissioner John J. Mueller said in a statement following the arrests, "The passage of time only reinforces our commitment to solving these heinous crimes. The Yonkers Police prides itself on focusing on victims and their families and doing whatever we can to deliver justice for them. I hope that these arrests bring some degree of closure to Pamela's family and friends, and I applaud the extraordinary efforts of our cold case detectives in closing this case after so many years. Well done." A partially buried body was found in the area known as Orange Avenue Ranch or Peachtree Camp off I-90 on September 13, 1992, in Missoula County, Montana. Detectives identified the victim as William Adams, also known as Cadillac Man. William was a known transient in the area. He was stabbed in the chest and suffered massive head trauma, and was left in a shallow grave at the base of a hill. He still had a broken knife in his chest when found. William was wearing a sweat jacket and wool sweater that had been pulled up over his head as if he were dragged to the location. Several other items of clothing were found at the scene, including 2 ball caps and a bloody shirt or jacket. Detectives at the time believed the suspect cut his hand and used the clothing found at the scene to stop the bleeding. These items were collected to be used when DNA technology would be more advanced. That time finally come in 2022. Through recent DNA testing, that blood evidence led detectives to a suspect identified as Leonard Owen, also known as 8-Ball. Owen was also a transient man with an extensive criminal history which included violent crimes. He has since passed away. With cooperation from his immediate family and an organization called Season of Justice, detectives made a positive identification. Missoula County Sheriff T.J. McDermott established the cold case unit in January of 2019 and says it's been successful in solving cold cases for Missoula County Sheriff's Office and multiple law enforcement jurisdictions across Montana. Our cold case unit has proven invaluable, Sheriff T.J. McDermott stated. Their dedication and perseverance to seek the truth and close these cases is appreciated by many, including law enforcement, past and present, and family members that experience closure. It is not known at this point in time why Leonard Owen decided to take the life of William Adams. On July 15, 1996, a woman's body was discovered in Sonoma County, California. Her body was found by a survey crew working in the area of Stony Point Road, north of West Railroad Avenue. She was identified as 32-year-old Michelle Marie Veal of Union City, California. The autopsy showed she had suffered multiple skull fractures and a broken neck. Items that contained DNA belonging to the suspect was collected from the crime scene and stored to be used later. Detectives conducted an extensive investigation at the time, but unfortunately came up cold. In April of 2021, detectives submitted forensic evidence they had for review at the Serological Research Institute for biological testing. On January 18, 2022, investigators got a hit. A DNA match came back to Jack Alexander Boken. He passed away on December 4, 2021, where he had been in custody at the California Department of Corrections Medical Facility in Vacaville, California. Boken had been arrested in October of 1997, less than a year after Michelle's life was taken, by San Francisco police on a charge of kidnapping with the intent to commit assault. In 2000, Boken was sentenced to 231 years in the case. Boken's cousin, Lora Ann, had this to say about him. She described him as a brilliant boy who grew up in a working-class family in the Mission in San Francisco. He had what she called dirty secrets. He was sneaking his father's gun to school at age 7. By the time he was 9, he was stealing bikes. And when he was 10, he started assaulting Lora when she was just 3 years old. Even at the young age, Jack Boken was already so practiced in stealth that the abuse was never suspected. In the years that followed, not even my father, who was a San Francisco police inspector, sensed that anything was wrong, Lora Ann wrote. Lora also chronicled a host of other women that Boken abused. She documented in great detail all the harms Boken had caused women, stating that even though he was family, he will never and should never have another chance at freedom, but I find no joy in that, only relief for myself and deep regret that he wasted his life and shattered so many others. Michelle's family had this to say in a statement. Though she has been gone, memories of her beautiful smile, impeccable style, generous spirit, and enthusiasm for life live on forever in the hearts of the many people whose lives she touched. Our dear Michelle was a mom of 3 young girls who were raised in the care of her incredible mother, as well as by her loving sister. Though her struggles made her particularly vulnerable at times, Michelle's strength is what kept her persevering through many adversities to do her best for those she loved. Michelle's tenacious spirit lives on in her daughters, who are all leading happy and healthy lives today, and raising their children to remember her as the beautiful grandmother whom we all wish they could have met. 29-year-old Cathleen Krauseneck lived in Brighton, New York in 1982 with her husband James and 3-year-old daughter. On February 19, 1982, officers with the Brighton Police Department responded to a 911 call at a home located on Del Rio Drive. The call was made by Krauseneck's neighbor. James arrived at the man's house with a look of terror on his face, claiming someone took Kathy's life. Upon entering their home, police located Kathy's lifeless body in the bed she shared with her husband. An axe was embedded in her head. It appeared as if her life was taken while she was sleeping. James told investigators that he left Kathy and their daughter at 6:30 a.m. and drove to Eastman Kodak, where he worked as an economist. He said when he came home after work, he found Kathy's body in their bed and the home in disarray. He then went over to the neighbor and asked him to call 911. Investigators took a close look at the axe that was used to commit the crime. The handle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Despite some investigators believing James Krauseneck was responsible, nothing concrete tied him to the crime, and the case went unsolved for years. At one point, Ed Larrabee confessed, while in prison, to taking Kathy's life. Detectives deemed Larrabee a serial confessor. His claims did not match any of the evidence, and he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. The case was reopened in 2015, after officials with the Monroe County District Attorney's Office reviewed the case with the Brighton Police Department and the FBI. The county crime lab and renowned medical examiner Dr. Michael Bodden also assisted in the investigation. Then, in November 2019, James Krauseneck was arrested by officers with the Brighton Police Department and charged with taking Kathy's life. He entered a plea of not guilty and was released after posting a $100,000 bail. Brighton Police Chief David Cathaldi said that after thousands of hours of investigation, detectives found no evidence that anybody else was in the home other than James and the couple's daughter. No other physical evidence at the scene, including DNA, points to anyone except James Krauseneck Jr., Cathaldi said in announcing James's arrest. What we did not find was any evidence that points to anyone else that was in that home. There's no boogeyman out there. There was no outside party in the house during the commission of that crime, he added. State Supreme Court Justice Charles Schiano Jr. announced that the trial will start on August 29, 2022. James Krauseneck's defense attorney highlighted that the case against his client was a circumstantial one. Prosecutors argued that Krauseneck should be found guilty because no other person could have committed the crime. Dr. Bodden said that it was his opinion that Kathy's life was taken between 9 p.m. the previous evening and 4 a.m., hours before Krauseneck left for work. Attorneys also focused on the theory that Krauseneck decided to end Kathy's life after she discovered he had lied about his background. He began working at Eastman Kodak on the pretense that he held a PhD, though investigators later learned he hadn't earned his doctorate. Prosecutors also said that the crime scene was staged to look like a burglary and that the items of evidence, including the axe handle, had been wiped clean of fingerprints. On September 26, 2022, 70-year-old James Krauseneck was found guilty of taking his wife's life. Krauseneck is scheduled to appear before New York State Supreme Court Justice Charles Schiano on November 7, 2022 for sentencing. Assistant District Attorney Patrick Gallagher said, "I am proud to be part of the team who found justice for Kathleen Krauseneck 40 years after James Krauseneck took an axe from his garage and used it to strike her in the head while she was asleep. It has been one of the greatest pleasures of my career to get to know Kathy's family and to be able to help in securing justice for their loved one." Kathy's father, 95-year-old Robert Schlosser, spoke with reporters following the guilty verdict. "I've got one thing to do," Robert said. "I'm going to get my daughter's body removed from the Krauseneck plot and move back with her mother and brother." Robert explained he wanted to live long enough to see justice prevail before bringing Kathy's body back to Michigan. "My wife passed away 4 years ago," he told reporters. "She didn't make it." On October 6, 1988, a woman's body was found in the Neches River in Port Arthur, Texas. She was quickly identified as 36-year-old Patricia Ann Howell Jacobs. Patricia was last seen the previous evening at the Silver Spur nightclub in Silsbee, Texas. A month after being found, her driver's license and other personal items were located under a bridge near Kuntz, Texas. Investigators identified Daniel Andrew McGinnis as a suspect after 2 incidents involving women, but did not have enough evidence to charge him in Patricia's case. Then, in 2018, Patricia's family reached out to the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program. This program was created in 2001 by the Texas legislature to provide Texas law enforcement agencies with a process for investigating unsolved cold cases, or what appear to be serial or linked criminal transactions. The Rangers believe further investigation was needed and officially reopened the case in October of 2018. Through the new investigation, clothing that had never been DNA tested and other items were identified, and the evidence was submitted to the Houston DPS crime lab. The new DNA evidence, collected from the clothing, was then entered into the combined DNA index system. Recently, investigators learned that a match was made. DNA found on the clothing belonged to Daniel Andrew McGinnis. After an interview and confirmation of the DNA evidence, he was arrested and charged in Jefferson County, Texas. His trial took place in September of 2022. On September 20, he pled guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years, which will run concurrently with the previous 199-year sentence in Tyler County. At around 11:10 a.m. March 29, 1983, a man playing with his dog found a woman's body in the San Lorenzo River in Santa Cruz County, California. She was identified as 33-year-old Joette Marie Smith. Joette had been strangled. Investigators collected numerous items of evidence at the crime scene. Joette was the beloved owner of the Buffalo Gals restaurant in Ben Lomond, California, around 30 miles southwest of San Jose. She was last seen sometime before midnight on March 27, 1983, around 36 hours before her body was discovered. Witnesses told investigators that on the night of her disappearance, Joette had first enjoyed a quiet night of eating popcorn and watching the TV series The Thornbirds with her roommate, Rachel Devereaux. Joette and Rachel shared a studio apartment just across the street from Joette's restaurant. Rachel said that she and Joette stayed up for the 11 o'clock news, after which Joette made some phone calls and Rachel retired for the evening. When Rachel woke up around 3 a.m., Joette was not there, which wasn't atypical for her. It wasn't unusual for her to go out. She would often go over to the restaurant, Rachel said in a 1983 interview. According to witnesses, Joette walked to one nearby bar, found that it was already closed, and walked to another, Henfling's Bar, which was also closing. There, she purchased a pack of cigarettes, but refused a ride home from a woman server she knew, telling the woman she would walk home because it was a pleasant evening. She never made it home. For the next several years, detectives interviewed dozens of people and investigated several leads and tips, but no viable suspect was identified. In 1988, there was movement in the case. Investigators identified a suspect named Eric David Drummond, a man with an extensive history of violent crimes, including assault convictions in California and Nevada. Authorities believe Drummond had once asked Joette out on a date while at her restaurant, but she rebuffed his advances. In the days after, Joette's life was taken. Drummond abruptly left California, according to Santa Cruz County officials. While there was circumstantial information tying Drummond to the crime, no criminal case could be brought against him without further physical evidence. Authorities reopened Joette's case early in 2022. They took a fresh look at her clothing and used scientific technology that was not available in the 1980s. From there, experts were able to develop a male suspect's DNA profile. In August of 2022, authorities directly obtained a DNA sample from the now 64-year-old Eric Drummond and determined his DNA matched the sample from the crime scene evidence. Before investigators could arrest Eric Drummond, they learned that he had taken his own life. The sheriff's office came out with a statement saying, "Unfortunately, while the final investigative steps were taken to obtain an arrest warrant, Drummond chose to end his own life in the hills of Sierra County." While Drummond will never face criminal charges or a jury of his peers, the sheriff's office is confident that the evidence in this case would support a conviction of Drummond for taking the life of Joette Smith. The sheriff's office extends our condolences to the family and friends of Joette Smith. We wish to remind the community of Santa Cruz that the sheriff's office will continue to investigate each of our cold cases. Friends describe Joette as a remarkable woman who was hospitable, happy, and full of vigor. Born and raised in a Polish Catholic family in Nebraska, she moved to Santa Cruz about 10 years before she lost her life. On January 10, 1984, 50-year-old Patricia Smith's body was found in the Lakewood condo she shared with her daughter and grandchildren just west of Denver, Colorado. She had been assaulted and then fatally beaten with a hammer. Male DNA was collected from her body, nearby carpeting, and on a blanket that was used to cover her body. Patricia used to be a flight attendant. She was described as an outgoing, friendly, sophisticated woman who had recently started her own interior decorating business. At the time of Patricia's discovery, the Denver metropolitan area was plagued by a 12-day crime spree. Multiple victims in the area suffered the same fate as Patricia. In 2010, as DNA technology was getting more advanced, investigators were able to confirm that it was the same man responsible for the multiple hammer attacks in Denver back in 1984. One of the other hammer attacks that was committed by the man responsible for what happened to Patricia is the attacker on the Bennett family. This is a photo of the family. The unknown man was responsible for taking 3 of their lives just 6 days after he ended Patricia's life. Bruce Bennett had married his wife Deborah before joining the Navy, where he served at Pearl Harbor between 1976 and 1980 as a sonar analyst. Upon the completion of his service commitment, Bruce and Deborah moved to Aurora, Colorado. There, Bruce worked at a family-owned furniture store and helped Deborah raise the 2 daughters. They led a quiet life. They worked hard and stayed home at night. Bruce enrolled in a local college, where he trained to be an air traffic controller with an eye toward landing a job at an airport in the area. These dreams came to a shattering end on January 15, 1984, between midnight and 6 a.m. when an intruder entered the Bennett home. Investigators believe Bruce confronted the attacker on the stairs. Deep gashes were later found on his arms and body, and blood was found up and down the staircase. The following morning, Deborah's body was discovered in her bedroom, while 7-year-old Melissa was found in her bed. The young daughter, Vanessa, then age 3, was in bed when her grandmother came to the house and discovered the carnage. She survived the attack, despite suffering a shattered jaw and pelvis, among other horrific injuries. More than 500 people were questioned during this initial phase of the investigation, and while no arrests were made, detectives never stopped looking for the person responsible. 6 years after DNA technology linked Patricia's case with the Bennett family in 2016, investigators used age-processed DNA phenotyping, a technique developed by Parabon Nanolabs and dubbed Snapshot, to try and move the investigation forward. The result was a pair of images. One, a likeness of a possible suspect at the time, and a second aged to approximate his appearance in 2016. After the flurry of activity spurred by the snapshot pictures quieted down, the Bennetts and Patricia slid from the headlines again. Finally, in August 2018, investigators announced that they caught the man responsible for all the hammer attacks, when his DNA scored a hit on the combined DNA index system. The man is Alex Ewing. In 2018, he was already behind bars for brutally beating a couple in Nevada with an axe handle. In August 2021, a jury in Arapahoe County District Court found Ewing guilty of taking the lives of Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa Bennett. "I have seen all kinds of evil and wickedness. Nothing compares to the level of depravity that your actions show in this case," said Judge Darren Veal at Ewing's sentencing. "There is no punishment that is too harsh for you. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never draw a free breath ever again," he added. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years for each crime, to be served consecutively to his prison term in Nevada. Patricia's case proved to be more difficult. In October of 2021, a Jefferson County court judge declared a mistrial after granting a defense request for Ewing to undergo a competency evaluation. He passed that test, leading to a launch of a second trial that concluded in April 2022 with a guilty verdict. Afterward, 1st Judicial District DA Alex King, whose office prosecuted Ewing, issued the following statement: "We truly appreciate the jury's service in this difficult case, and our thoughts are with the family of Patricia Smith as they finally see justice for her horrific demise over 3 decades ago. Today's verdict is the result of significant efforts and dedication by law enforcement, scientists, the witnesses who testified, and our staff, without whom this outcome would not have been possible." On April 12, 2022, Alex Ewing was sentenced to another life sentence for what he did to Patricia Smith. Patricia's daughter Cherry Letton had this to say: "It was not a human that took my mother's life. It was an evil monster who does not deserve to walk this earth. Ewing is not expected to be tried in several other attacks he is suspected of carrying out in the Denver area around the same time. One of those incidents was a home invasion on January 4th, 1984, during which a man beat a sleeping couple with a hammer. Shortly after Alex Ewing took the lives of the Bennett family, authorities arrested him in Kingman, Arizona, for breaking into a man's home and beating him with a slab of concrete. Due to overcrowding in Arizona, Ewing was held at a detention center in Utah before his trial. In August 1984, Ewing was en route back to Arizona when the deputies transporting him stopped in Henderson, Nevada for a restroom break and he escaped. That very night, Ewing broke into yet another home in Nevada and beat a couple with an axe handle, nearly ending their lives. He was arrested 2 days later and spent the next 3 decades in the Nevada prison system before DNA connected him to the other crimes in 2018. A woman's remains were found on the side of California State Route 152 in the Gilroy area, about 80 miles southeast of San Francisco, in June 1993, in an area known as Pacheco Pass. The female body was dressed in blue clothing and she could not be identified. Cold case detectives referred to the Jane Doe as Blue Pacheco. In 2006, Keith Hunter Jefferson submitted a letter to the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, admitting to assaulting an unknown female along a dirt turnout on Highway 152 and then ending her life. A year later, he pled guilty. Investigators have confirmed that Jefferson has taken the lives of at least 8 people. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to help investigators in identifying Blue Pacheco. In 2019, investigators began utilizing genetic genealogy in an attempt to identify her. They partnered with the nonprofit DNA Doe Project. Finally, on April 13, 2022, she was identified as Patricia Skiple. She was known to family and friends as Patsy. Patricia was a mother and approximately 45 years old when her life was taken. As for Jefferson, he is serving 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole in Oregon. On December 18, 1996, a little after 9 a.m., workers at the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park Cemetery in Annandale, Virginia, discovered the body of a woman. She was found near the section of the cemetery where infants are buried. The workers then called police. It was discovered that she put a bag over her head and secured the bag with tape. She was wearing a red shirt, a sweater, blue pants, and an Eddie Bauer jacket. An 8-inch Christmas tree and her backpack were found next to her. She was also found to be listening to a cassette tape using a tape player and headphones. 2 notes were found with one saying, "Now I lay me down to sleep, soon to drift to the eternal deep. And though I shall die and shall not wake, sleep sweeter will be than this life I forsake." The second message read, "Deceased by own hands, prefer no autopsy. Please order cremation, with funds provided. Thank you, Jane Doe." 2 $50 bills were found with her. One of the bills was for the cemetery, the other bill was for the coroner. Authorities determined that she really did take her own life by suffocation, but they were unable to identify her. The unknown woman was nicknamed the Christmas Tree Lady. She was reported to be a Caucasian woman, had a height of around 5 feet, and was between 50 and 70 years old. Hoping to find a match, authorities looked at many nearby cases which involved missing people, but they failed. In 2000, a colored sketch of the Christmas Tree Lady was released. Unfortunately, no one came forward who knew her, and she would remain unidentified for many more years. Then, in 2022, investigators partnered with Othram Inc., a Texas lab, to help identify the woman. In January, they conducted tests using DNA. The tests were made possible by donations. In May of 2022, Othram discovered that a man, David Meyer, could be the Christmas Tree Lady's brother. Investigators contacted David, and he told them that he did have a missing sister. After David looked at the drawing of the Christmas Tree Lady, he was not able to say whether or not she was his sister, because the last time he saw her was decades ago. The detectives then went to his other sister, Clough. Clough said that it was definitely their sister. DNA was taken from Clough, and the Christmas Tree Lady was then identified as their sister, 69-year-old Joyce Marilyn Meyer Somers. This is what we know about her. She was born in Davenport, Iowa on July 20th, 1927, and had 4 siblings. Joyce relocated to Los Angeles to work at a magazine. After she left the magazine, she taught 2nd grade at a local Los Angeles elementary school. In the 1960s, Joyce and her mother had an argument where she felt that her mother was treating her terribly. Joyce then moved to Seattle and married, but later divorced in 1977. She then moved to Tucson, Arizona, where her siblings visited her. This was the last time they saw her. Her siblings later hired a private investigator to locate her, but this failed. In the early 1990s, Joyce's brother traveled to Tucson in an attempt to locate her, only to find the trailer she had lived in abandoned. In it, he discovered a book, The Target Child, written by Joyce. In the book, she wrote about her supposed abusive upbringing. Major Ed O'Carroll had this to say: "After decades of wondering what had happened to their loved one, Joyce's family is finally at peace, thanks to the dedicated work of several generations of FCPD detectives, anonymous donors, and Othram. Our detectives never stopped working for Joyce and her family. Advances in technology will continue to help close cases and prove answers to victims' families." Shortly before 6 a.m. on January 21, 2003, deputies responding to reports of gunfire found 2 victims' bodies laying face down alongside the road in the 2001 block of Willow Glen Drive in Dehesa, California. Each had been shot repeatedly. They were identified as 30-year-old Patrick John Greene and 17-year-old Christopher Brandon Vigil. Witnesses told police they heard someone talking and then heard 5 or 6 rapid gunshots and a car screeching away. It would take over 19 years for investigators to track down the person responsible. On April 13, 2022, agents with the Regional Fugitive Task Force arrested Michael Romero of National City, California. Officials have not yet disclosed what led investigators to identify Romero as the culprit. The circumstances and motivations of the case are still under investigation. Romero was booked into the San Diego Central Jail.